Hey guys, I'm your host Tara A. Devlin, and welcome to this week's episode of Kowabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. The latest book in the Deikan series, Volume 3, is now out. If you'd like to learn more about some of Japan's most haunted and dangerous spots, then this is the book for you. You can find all sorts of abandoned shrines, hospitals, parks, and even lesser-known places you wouldn't even think could be haunted. That's Deikan, the Most Haunted Locations in Japan, Volume 3, out now. This week, we're looking at tales of terrifying things you can find in the mountains. It's said that mountains make up over 80% of Japan's landmass, but many of them remain empty, difficult to reach, and sometimes seemingly locked away in time. Do you really know what's lurking out there? First up, a young man takes his brand new motorbike camping on a mountain, but there he runs into something quite strange that seems interested in his new vehicle. But will he be able to escape this encounter alive? Find out in The Thing in the Mountains. When my grandfather was young, he was rich and one of the few people to own a motorcycle. His parents offered him all the support he needed, so he never suffered. And so, he was able to ride his bike that guzzled fuel whenever he wanted. One day, my grandfather got on his beloved bike and decided to camp in the mountains. Electric lights were only just starting to spread at the time. So, at night in the mountains, you were surrounded by absolute darkness. My grandfather set up his tent, started a fire, and then sat down to drink. But as he was starting to get tipsy, he suddenly sensed somebody approaching. The term camp touring didn't really exist at the time. The only things you would encounter in the mountains at that time of night would be beasts, hunters, or monsters. My grandfather grabbed the nutter hanging by his waist and waited to see what would arrive. Eventually, he heard the sound of bushes being parted, and then the thing appeared before him. He called it a thing because there wasn't really anything else that he could compare it to. It apparently had a terribly strange appearance. It was taller than the nearby trees, but not much wider, and only about half the size of my grandfather. Apparently it was like a long, thick, swaying stick. This strange sight frightened my grandfather, and so he just stared at it, unable to say anything. And as this thing that looked like a stick swayed in front of him, suddenly it spoke. For a moment, my grandfather had no idea what it said. Thanks to its strong accent and pronunciation, he could only just barely work out from the end of its sentence that it was asking a question. And when my grandfather didn't reply, the creature bent its long body, moving what was presumably its head near my grandfather's bike, and again, it asked the same thing. At that, my grandfather finally understood what it was trying to ask. "Is this your horse?" He was afraid the creature might do something if he stayed quiet, so he summoned up all his courage and replied as bravely as he could. "Yes." The creature stared at the bike for a while. It had no face, so it was hard to tell. And then it spoke again. "It's shiny. I want it." At that moment, my grandfather realized that every time the thing spoke, there was an intense smell of blood in the air. He didn't know whether it was people or animals, but either way, the thing ate meat. Instinctively, he felt like a bad answer would cost him his life, so if he could live in exchange for his bike, he would. "If you want it, take it," he said, The creature seemed to think it over. Again, it had no face, so it was hard to tell. Then it spoke. "What does this thing eat?" "A lot of gasoline," my grandfather said. "I can't give it animal feed." "No, this horse doesn't have a mouth," my grandfather said, pointing at his bike. "Ah, no mouth, no mouth. You're right, it doesn't," the creature agreed. By this point of the conversation, my grandfather realized he was no longer afraid of the thing. The creature then sat on the bike and swayed there for a while, before letting out a sigh and then groaning. "I want it, but if it doesn't eat anything..." Its body then shook as though it was upset. How about you take this instead then?" my grandfather said, thinking it would be bad to make the creature angry. He took some sweets out of his bag and threw them towards the creature. They seemed to get sucked into its body and then disappeared. "Thanks," it muttered, and then it disappeared into the darkness of the mountain. When my grandfather could no longer see it, he said he heard its regretful groans echoing in the mountain. It was at that point that my grandfather realized he had wet himself. He spent the night trembling in his tent, and when the sun rose, he went back down the mountain right away. When he got home, he told everyone what happened, but of course, nobody believed him. The only person who did was his grandfather, my great-great-grandfather. Mountain monsters are fond of rare things, so the moment you took your bike there, it no doubt had its eye on it. It's good that you gave it up. If you had stubbornly refused it, then it would have no doubt eaten you, he said. After that, my grandfather never took his bike to the mountains again. And, on that note, that bike is still back in the storehouse of our family home, even now. The boy in this next story enjoys fishing, but on his way home through a mountain tunnel, he comes across something terrifying. What is it? Find out in Tunnel in the Mountains. This happened when my father was in elementary school. At the time, he really liked fishing, and when he had a day off, he'd grab his bucket and line early in the morning and head over the mountain to a village nearby. It took 20 minutes to get there by car, but the roads were pretty bad at the time, so on foot, it took him around 4 hours. His destination was a spot just past that village, and to get there, he had to go through a tunnel in the mountains. Then, it was at the bottom of a cliff. On this particular day, the fishing was better than usual, so he stayed there all day, and before he knew it, the sun was setting, and a beautiful starry sky appeared above. He thought he could still fish some more, but his parents would be angry that he was so late, so he decided to leave. The mountain path was unexpectedly bright, considering that it was night, so he easily found his way back to the tunnel. The tunnel wasn't that long, and he could see light coming from the exit. As he got closer to the exit, he could slowly make out something near the ceiling of the tunnel. The shadows of a mass of ivy and vines. Huh? But then he noticed something strange about the shadow. It wasn't actually ivy or vines, but rather something hanging from the ceiling. Wondering what it was, he walked over with his rod and bucket towards the exit. There was a woman in a thin kimono, like a yukata, hanging upside down from the top of the tunnel. Her hair was hanging towards the ground, and there was a terrifying expression on her face as she muttered something. My father threw the bucket and ran. Now, he didn't run because he was scared, but rather he was thinking, "Oh no, there's an old lady hanging in the air. I need to find help. Help!" And so he ran to the village and in a panic told the police officer what he'd seen. The officer didn't seem to believe him, but just in case something bad had happened, he and a few other villagers made their way towards the tunnel. But there, they found nothing. Not even the fish that should have been scattered from my father's bucket. All they found was his bucket, empty, and his fishing rod. When he was done telling me his story, my father said a little angrily, "I really didn't have a good night that night." Apparently, the officer and villagers were quite upset at him playing such a prank on them at night. And on top of that, he didn't even have any fish, so he was quite upset. As for that tunnel, it's still well known as a ghost spot amongst the locals even today. A young man working in the mountains encounters an odd woman he's warned to stay away from. Yet, a few colleagues decide to ignore that warning. Will they pay the price? Find out in The Peeping Woman. This story is about my friend T's grandfather. When his grandfather was young, he worked in the mountains with a few friends. When he was still new to the job, they slept in the mountains as well. And one time, he saw a beautiful woman looking at them through some bushes. There were no houses nearby, so he found it strange, but he still wasn't used to the job yet. So, as he immersed himself in it, the woman disappeared. That night, he told the guys about what he'd seen, and the foreman frowned. "She only had one arm and one leg, right? You mustn't ever go near her," he warned him. T's grandfather had only seen her face between the bushes, but still, he nodded in agreement at the warning. The next day, he saw that woman peeping at them again. He had no intention of talking to her, but the woman was beautiful. Then she fully showed herself. She had only one arm and one leg, and she hopped towards him and reached for his crotch. T's grandfather was still inexperienced with women, so he jumped away in surprise, hiding himself as the woman giggled, and then disappeared back into the bushes. Apparently, it was even more creepy because the woman really was incredibly beautiful. That night, a man by the name of A didn't return to the cabin. Everyone was worried, but as the night wore on, he finally returned and said that he had gotten lost in the mountains. Everyone laughed, but the foreman, who was sitting next to T's grandfather, sighed deeply. The next day, the foreman and A had a chat. The grin on A's face reminded him a lot of that woman's. "We just had a little fun, that's all." Hearing that, T's grandfather knew that A had been with the woman. And after that, A and even his good friend B started returning later and later. "Don't follow them. You'll lose your arm and leg." The foreman said something unbelievable to T's grandfather, but he had no intention of going either way. On the day they finished work in the mountains, A said he was going to remain behind. Of course, that wasn't allowed, but it wasn't like anyone could stop him from returning once they got back to town. And after that, nobody ever saw A again. Neither A nor B showed up for the next job. A went missing, but apparently B had an accident in which he lost his arm and his leg. Two friends decide to go fishing in the mountains, but when they reach their destination, they find something far more terrifying than fish. What's actually lurking in that stream? Find out in The Thing That Fell from the Waterfall. This happened about 10 years ago. My friend invited me to go fishing in a stream deep in the mountains. I wasn't a very experienced fisher, but my friend was a veteran, so I followed his guidance upstream. The river was beautiful, and as I excitedly climbed, we reached a spot with a waterfall about 10 meters high. It was beyond beautiful, and for a while we both forgot about fishing and simply stared at it. But as we were staring at it, suddenly, a naked person fell from the top along with the water. There was a dull thud as their body hit the rocks below, but the person didn't seem to be conscious as their limbs flailed about in strange directions. Maybe it's natural, I don't know, but they didn't even budge once they landed either. Was the person already dead? Or did the fall do it? Either way, it was such a bizarre thing to see that my friend and I were unsure of what to do. But then, when we decided to approach the person to see if they were okay, suddenly my friend screamed, "Here comes another one!" I looked up, and another naked person was falling. What on earth is up with this waterfall? I thought. But then, body after body fell over the edge with the water. I can't really think of a good comparison, but all these naked bodies kept falling over the edge like flowing noodles down a chute. They appeared to be in their 20s or 30s, and there were men and women alike. Like broken dolls, they hit the rocks and then folded underneath the waterfall. We decided that we should call the police right away, so we went back down the river to the car, drove for about 10 or 20 minutes back down the road we came, and then we called the police and told them what had happened. More than 10 people are dead! Due to the location, it wasn't possible for an ambulance to drive up there, so they sent a helicopter instead. Then, finally, a police car arrived and we explained to the officers again what we'd seen. But after some time passed, the helicopter contacted the police and said they were unable to find any bodies. There was no way, I thought. So we walked back up on foot, but we looked everywhere and couldn't even find the waterfall again, let alone the bodies. After that, my friend and I often had hallucinations of a large number of dead bodies. Sometimes this happened when we were together, but it also often happened when we were alone as well. These bodies could appear in various ways, like filling up a plastic greenhouse, or washed up on shore, or even packed into an arriving elevator. After what happened at the waterfall, we no longer contact the police when this happens, but they always seem to appear right as we've forgotten about them, making them even more surprising. A man working on the construction side of some roadworks encounters a rather odd man when he's alone at the office at night. What is the man screaming about? And why is he so afraid? Find out in Toki no Bo. Because we were working on management for a national highway in the west of Saitama Prefecture, an office was built in the mountains alongside it, so we could continue work even at night. Most of the people who didn't work at night either went home or stayed at a business hotel in a nearby town. I, meanwhile, stayed in the office overnight with the person in charge. On weeknights when there was work, there was always someone in the office, and nothing ever happened. But naturally, workers had days off, and during those days, nobody would be at the site at all. Even the person in charge went home, and I would be left in the office all alone. Now, this was a national highway, yes, but it ran through the mountains, so there wasn't a lot of traffic. At night, there were a few races and trucks, and that was about it. Being there all by myself was honestly kind of scary. During the day, I'd go to the nearby convenience store to buy food, drinks, and magazines to read at night. The management office was a regular 2-story prefab building. The break room was on the first floor, and the meeting and nap room were on the second. One day, I made my rounds of the site until evening and chatted with the security guard who was keeping an eye on the highway. I heard that there was no security on days off or at night, so I was a little afraid that I'd be the only one there. Around 6 p.m. that night, the guard came to get his stamp, and because I was scared, I tried to chat with him a little. "Sorry, I'd like to go home now," he said, however, and then quickly left. But on the way out, he also said, "You should go to bed early." Like he was my mother or something. But his expression was hard, unlike his usual carefree look, so I remember it well. The sun went down and everything got dark. I ate the food I bought in the break room on the first floor, then I flicked through a magazine and drank some beer. When I was about halfway through the can, I heard a noise outside. It sounded like small rocks being thrown at the steel equipment, like kang, kang, kang. It wasn't terribly loud, but I could still clearly hear it. I decided to ignore it. A short while later, I heard that same sound again. I couldn't ignore it any longer, so I went outside to see what it was. If something happened, I would be the one responsible after all. I grabbed a light, left the office, and started walking towards the heavy machinery, where the sound had come from. I thought that maybe someone had thrown some pebbles as a prank, but nobody was there. I did a lap of the area, but I couldn't find anything strange, so I started back for the office. But then I heard some rustling, like someone pushing their way through the bushes, and in surprise, I turned around. Someone was there. It was an old guy in a suit. He was around 180 centimeters tall, or maybe even more. I glanced at his face, but he looked like your average old guy, and the only thing that even vaguely stood out were his large eyes. It had to be him. "Who are you?" I asked. He ignored me and continued moving through the vegetation as he made his way towards the mountain. I chased after him. Hey! Hey! Wait! Then the old man stopped in the bushes and muttered something while looking the other way. Huh? What? Turn this way. I thought the old guy had to be crazy, so, annoyed, I approached him. I couldn't make out what he was saying exactly, but it sounded like he was repeating "Toki no bo, Toki no bo," over and over. Huh? What are you saying? I shone my light at his head, but as soon as I did, he took off running at full speed into the mountains. I was creeped out, so I decided not to follow him and instead return to the office. But knowing there was such a weirdo outside, I couldn't sleep. Instead, I decided to call the boss, just in case something happened, and tell him what happened. Yeah. He's no doubt just some weirdo. It's probably nothing. You'll be fine, he said. And that was the end of that. But that creepy word, Toki no bo, was stuck in my ears, and I was afraid. As such, I called a colleague I was good friends with. "Hey, something weird happened. Could you come over?" At first, he complained that he was tired and couldn't be bothered, but I begged him, and I guess he got the picture because he finally relented and said he would come. When you're waiting for someone, time seems to go on forever. I looked at the clock, thinking 30 minutes must have passed, but it was only 5. It was just after 9 p.m. My colleague should be arriving shortly, yet more time passed and he still wasn't there. I called him, but he didn't answer. It then switched to his voicemail. Strange ideas started filling my head. Did he have an accident on the way over? Something didn't feel right, and I couldn't calm down. I lit a cigarette in the break room, and then, outside, I heard a strange scream. Honestly, I was terrified, but I ran outside. It was that old man, and he was running around and screaming. At some point, the area had also filled with a thick fog. I need to call the police, I thought, but when I took my phone out, the old man screamed and ran towards me. "Help me!" I was the one who wanted help. The man's pale, ghastly face scared me so much that I dropped my phone. The very next moment, he stood on it. I heard it snap. I also heard something snap inside my head. "Hey, asshole!" I screamed, yanking the old man's arm. He hit the ground hard, and I picked up my phone. It was completely broken, and the screen shattered. The old man looked up at me with a frightened look on his face. "What on earth are you doing?" "Quickly! Quickly!" He wasn't making any sense. That was all he kept saying. "Quickly! Quickly!" Annoyed, I snapped at him and told him to shut up. I grabbed his arm to pull him up, but he screamed and pulled himself free before running away. The old man ran towards the national highway, and I chased after him. In the heavy fog and dim construction lights, my footing was precarious, and in the end, I was chasing after a crazy man in the mountains, so I soon gave up. At any rate, it was an incredibly strange situation. I then heard the old man screaming again from the highway. "Ah! Don't come any closer!" What on earth was he running from? Was he high or something? As I was thinking that, the man screamed even louder than before. "Tokinobo!" At that same moment, the earth shook, and then I heard a car slamming on its brakes. I got goosebumps and couldn't help but feel like something terrible had just happened. Nervously, I made my way towards the highway. The headlights of a car approached. It was my colleague. He was the one who slammed on the brakes. Seeing his face, relief flooded me. "What was that massive sound just now?" I asked. Seemed a rock had fallen on the highway, and it was a rather large one too. "Did it nearly hit you?" I asked again, and he laughed and said he almost didn't see it because of the fog. I then asked him about the old man in the suit, but he said he hadn't seen any such thing. Come to think of it, the old man's screams had stopped too. Scared that he might have been squished under the rock, I went to check, but luckily that didn't seem to be the case. We rushed back to the office. There was no guarantee that more rocks wouldn't fall. "What's that over in the fog?" my colleague said. I turned to look in the direction he was pointing, and I could see a figure that looked human slowly walking into the darkness. "Look, we should just get back to the office, quickly." I was terrified, and once we got back, we spent the rest of the night unable to sleep. A group of university students looking to dig up an old urban legend in the mountains find something perhaps far more terrifying. But perhaps their lessons will actually save their lives this time. Find out why in Red River. This reminds me of an experience I had on Mount Kolya. I heard this legend when I used to live there. Long ago, there used to be an enclosed area on the mountain that was exclusively for the monks to use. But after the war, it was destroyed and left abandoned, although its remains are still there today. But it's a terribly dangerous place. There's no telling what might appear there, but either way, if you go, you won't return with your sanity intact. It was a pretty interesting story. I was a boarding student at the time, and during a day off during our summer holidays, I dragged some of the younger guys from the dorms with me to find these ruins. We didn't know exactly where these ruins were, however, so we started climbing the mountain like we were on our way to have a picnic. We were so naive. On Mount Kolya, the same trees grow in the same way, so if you get lost, it's hard to figure out exactly where you are. We took narrow animal trails for the hell of it, and it didn't take long for us to get lost. We had no idea where we were on the mountain, let alone how to get back. And the more we walked, the more we got lost. As the sun was starting to set, someone said, "If you get lost, then you should head to a ridge." He no doubt heard that somewhere before, but it would be better to look around there, rather than surrounded by nothing but Japanese yew trees. At any rate, we started climbing. I don't know how long we walked for, but we reached an area that looked like a ridge, and finally we were able to look around. I could see a large town in the distance, and on the other side, nearby, was a small town. Was that Nara and the other one Kuroyama? I guess so, but I still didn't know where we were. By this point, we were all tired, hungry, and thirsty. The only thing we could do was follow the ridge, and when we started walking towards the town in the distance, one of the other guys screamed, "Water! There's water!" I stopped and listened closer, and yeah, I could definitely hear the sound of water. I could also smell it. Perhaps there was a stream nearby. Either way, we were all thirsty, so we rushed towards the sound. After 5 minutes or so of stepping over bushes, everything opened up before us, and there was a surprisingly large river. I say large, but it was only 5 or 6 meters wide. But that didn't matter. We were beyond happy to finally find some water. A few guys took their shoes off and soaked their feet in the water. Others scooped up water in their bottles from the convenience store. I just wanted to drink, so I scooped some with my hands, but then I froze. "Hey, wait! Don't drink that water!" The other guys looked at me, confused, but I pointed to the bottom of the stream. That river had been flowing over the bedrocks for a long time, but the color of the rocks wasn't normal. They were bright red. A red like I'd never seen before. All the way upstream, it was a fresh, bright red. As we stared at this bright red river, everyone remembered something at the same time. We heard in class that, long ago, there was this mineral called cinnabar or something that people thought of as a cure-all. Apparently, the high monk took this medicine from Mount Kolya to Kyoto as well. But it wasn't a cure-all, but rather a poison. That was probably what the water of this river was flowing over. And it was this curol, this cinnabar, or rather, mercury sulfide, that was making the bedrocks red. The poison was creepy, but worse than that, everyone there froze like we'd touched something we really shouldn't have. And the further upstream you went, the redder the rocks got. There was certainly some temptation to write an interesting thesis about it, but as we went upriver, nobody said a word. When it comes to mountain climbing, I heard that it's general knowledge that you shouldn't go downstream, but we decided that was what we'd do. We walked for around 2 hours, and then we found ourselves at a small village, where a kind farmer gave us a lift to the nearest station in his small truck. Then we returned home and to our normal lives. I later returned to that farming village so I could thank the farmer, but by that point it had already been abandoned, and I wasn't able to find that red river again either. Still, it was an interesting experience for me. Japan's northeast is known for all sorts of fascinating folklore, and this story is no different. What lurks in the foggy mountains of Iwate? Find out in Yamase. I collect folk tales, and one of the stories that really stuck with me was one I heard from 2 different fishermen who often visited Tono City in Iwate Prefecture. It said that sometimes something called Yamase hits the mountain ravines of Tono City, and in this Yamase, you can sometimes hear the voices of several people talking. What is a Yamase? It's a cold wind that comes from the Pacific seaboard between spring and summer. When it does, the Tono Basin is wrapped completely in white, like it was filled with smoke from dry ice. It likes to accumulate particularly in low valleys and streams. Depending on the day, sometimes the fog can be so thick that you can't even see your own hand if you extend it, and numerous fishermen visiting Tono have been stranded when it comes. And in this Yamase, sometimes, they say you can hear human voices. The one thing both fishermen's stories had in common was that these voices weren't eerie, but rather they were quite lively, like a group of adults had gotten together to have a party. One of the men said he ran into a Yamase while fishing, and he spent the entire time with his back to a walnut tree. But then suddenly, he heard chatty voices, and a sound like cutlery being moved around, as well as kagura music. It took everything he had not to lose his mind. The other man continued fishing in the Yamase, and apparently he heard several people secretly chatting about something nearby. He even heard them joking and giggling, and according to him, the voices were probably the spirits of the mountain. The nature of those voices and how they come about remains unknown, but don't you feel like the story has a great sense of adventure about it? I wonder what it is that brings the Yamase down upon that area. An old family of hunters seem oddly successful, perhaps more than they should be, considering their circumstances. But when the son finds out why, things just get even more confusing. Find out why in Mashano. This is an old story about my grandfather who has since passed away. It'll be a little confusing with both my grandfather and his father, so I'll refer to my grandfather as A. A grew up in a mountain village where everyone was like a family. In the summer, peddlers would arrive from nearby villages and towns to sell their goods, but in winter, the roads were all blocked off with snow. A's family were originally Matagi hunters, so during the winter months, most people in the village got their animal meat from his family. As such, his family did quite well, and during the summer months, they were able to do whatever they liked. When he was younger, A didn't have any questions or doubts about the animals his siblings and parents brought in, but as he got older, he started to wonder. It's weird that they're able to get so many animals so consistently. But there was no way he could ask his strict father about it, so he kept those concerns to himself. As time went on, A himself grew up too. He was 15 or so, and they started teaching him how to shoot. The first winter he went hunting, his father invited him to join him, just the two of them, which was quite rare. It was always his older brother that taught him. His father didn't follow the usual route, however, and after walking in silence behind his father for about 2 hours, they reached a slightly open area. There, his father took out a knife and handed it to him. Cut off just a little from the tip of your thumb. Just a little is fine, but there must be blood. The look on his father's face was even more blank than usual, and unable to fight him, A did as he was told. His father then wrapped the bit of skin in blood-stained snow and threw it into the open area. After that, he treated the wound and apparently fired a few shots in the air near A. On the way home, his father was unusually wordy. "You might think it strange, but the reason we're able to have this lifestyle is thanks to Mashano." The pronunciation might be a little off. "This time, we just showed your face, but from here on out, you must always go there alone. Always. If you do, then you should find a dead animal there, but you must shoot it at least once and then bring it back to the village." A said nothing and simply listened to his father talk. When he went back to that area another day, he found 3 deer lying there. After that, he continued returning to that spot, and he always found an animal there that he could take back to his hunting family. And that's the extent of what my grandfather told me. He has since passed away, so I can't ask him to tell me what happened after that. He died falling down a mountain, but his body was never found, and my great-grandfather and other family members don't have graves either. I guess my grandfather wasn't supposed to tell me that story. Does the fact he told me mean that something is going to happen to me too? I have no idea. Yet another hunter discovers something quite odd when he goes into the mountains one day. Something that's going to make him change his profession and way of life for good. Find out what in The Begging Monkey. I heard this story from an old man I knew. It's a story about when he was a hunter in the mountains when he was younger. One time, some people asked him to get rid of a group of monkeys that were ruining their fields. So, he went over and fired towards them. He went into the mountains determined to get rid of as many as he could. And there, he found one. He readied his trigger finger, but then the monkey before him put its hands together, as though begging him, like, "Please, spare me." Looking closer, the monkey was a female with a large belly. As he looked around, he realized the other monkeys were likely the children born the year before, and these young monkeys all looked on, worried. The monkey continued holding her hands together before him, and apparently even shed a tear or two. After that, the old man gave up hunting. He moved to the city, started working at a factory, and in his spare time, he carved statues of Buddha. Time passed, and one day he stepped outside to go to work when he found a mountain of chocolate vine fruits by his front door. Confused, he examined them and found a few monkey hairs here and there. The whole time he told me that story, he was smiling from ear to ear. Finally this week, a man lost in the mountains gets a little bit of unexpected help, and perhaps just in time. Find out why in Flower. A man was walking through the mountains. Evening was approaching, so he picked up the pace. The trees swayed in the wind and made a rustling sound. A large gust of wind blew. A strange feeling overcame the man, almost like he was being watched. Not just by one person, but by many. His breath caught in his throat. Suddenly, he felt a chill and stopped on the spot. He turned around and saw a single girl standing behind him. "Are you a dead person?" the girl asked strangely. The man wanted nothing more than to run away, but instead he shook his head. "Come this way," the girl said, grabbing his hand and then running down an animal trail. When the man came back to his senses, he was standing at the entrance to the mountain path, holding a single flower in his hands. A huge thank you and shout out to this week's Kami tier members, Just Sawn and Emerald. It's thanks to your support, along with everyone else, that I'm able to keep doing this show, so thank you very much. Don't forget to check out Daikon, the Most Haunted Locations in Japan Volume 3, out on Amazon right now. And check out our merchandise store at kowabana.store. And if you'd like to chat about this week's stories, come and join us in the Kowabana Discord. You can find that link in the description or on kowabana.net. You can also check out our Patreon at patreon.com/TaraADevlin for exclusive bonus stories and extras, or our YouTube channel at youtube.com/KowabanaJapan for all sorts of Japanese horror you won't find anywhere else. Thanks guys, stay safe, and I'll see you again next time for even more Kowabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. Want even more scary stories? Head over to kowabana.net for new translations every week. You can also join our Patreon for exclusive stories you won't find anywhere else. Head over to kowabana.net now.